The Micro Effect. The Micro Effect. www.themicroeffect.com.
You take the blue pill. The story ends. You wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to believe. You take the red pill. You stay in Wonderland. And I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.
There was a mighty nation, blessed above all of creation. It was a rare and precious pearl, conceived in faith and liberty, home of the brave, land of the free. It was the envy of the world. But this shining city on a hill has turned from the Creator's will and let evil take control. Now the reckless men who lead them want to strip away their freedom and to steal their very soul. Now it's smoke and mirrors, switching bait, criticize and confiscate and let the guilty walk away. In this once righteous, godly nation, in the halls of education, they forbid a child to pray. They say we need to spread the wealth. They pretend to guard the health of the feeble and the poor, while the hand they hold behind their back confuses and conceals the fact that the wolf is at the door. There's an unseen hand.
Well, good morning, America, and welcome to Connecting the Dots with Dan Happel. It is January 15th, 2019, a beautiful morning here in southwest Montana, and we have a program today that should blow everybody's socks off, and that is a recap of the COP24 conference that happened in Poland just last month, and we have two terrific people here. I know our listeners are very familiar with Debbie Boscalupi. She had the radio program Radioactive Wednesday, and Debbie has been traveling the world following these conferences all over, literally all over the world, and so has Craig Rucker. Craig is the founder of CFACT, which is the Committee for a Constructive Tomorrow, and that's based out of Washington, D.C., and Craig Rucker has been involved very actively in the anti-Agenda 21 movement for a very long time because he sees just exactly what's behind all this. And this should be a fantastic radio program. Debbie and Craig, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Dan.
Thank you for having me.
Well, this should be a lot of fun. I mean, I know what great guests guys both are, and I know what a great host Debbie is, and I think we should have a tremendous program because I really want to hear firsthand. I haven't had a chance to talk to either one of you people to any extent about the COP24 conference, and I really want to hear all about it. So let's start the program today. Craig, do you want to add anything about CFACT and the work that you're doing to let our listeners know some of the things you're involved in? I did put on our announcement your movie that you were really involved in, Climate Hustle, and ways that our listeners could get that movie. But I want you to maybe tell our listeners some of the projects that you've been working on.
Sure, Dan. CFACT has been around since 1985. I'm a co-founder, along with David Rothbard, who tragically passed away last year. We are what we've been described as, and this is by the Boston Herald, as a Greenpeace of the right. We work on environmental issues, but from a pro-free market, pro-technology, pro-property rights perspective. We have a fairly large grassroots membership base. That's where we derive 95% of our funding. And we have been in Washington testifying sometimes before Congress. We have a number of reports we put out during the year. We have the largest climate skeptic website on global climate issues, headed by Mark Morano. Rush Limbaugh likes to call it his favorite source of global warming information other than himself. We have a student outreach. We operate college campuses across the country. We call it our Collegians program. And we've been attending these UN meetings, both on issues of sustainable development, but also climate change and population control and things of that sort, going back to the early 1990s. So we have extensive resources. People can learn about these issues at our website at cpac.org.
Okay, well, great. Craig, I have to say I'm always honored to have you on the radio program because I know how busy you are, and I know how difficult it is to get you on an interview just because of all the commitments you have. So I am very honored to have you here this morning with Debbie, and I know you two are both also personal friends as well as being working acquaintances. And Debbie, I think our listeners have missed your voice and your clarity for the last couple of months since you got so busy you couldn't take the time to be on the radio anymore on a full-time basis. I know that you're working on getting some of those things rearranged. In fact, Debbie and I are talking on a podcast with a number of other people about doing a podcast that will be international, and I look forward to working with you on the Red Pill radio network as well as the Micro Effect. So, Debbie, tell our listeners, I know most of them are familiar with you, but we've added a lot of new listeners in the last couple of months. In fact, Brenda Owens, my administrative assistant, really my brains, has been informing me that we now have listeners from almost 20 countries around the world who are tuning into our broadcast. So we are archiving our programs, and we are getting our programs on my danhappel.com website. And according to Brenda, we've been picking up an awful lot of listeners over the last couple of months. So, Debbie, talk to us a little about some of the projects you're working on.
Well, the podcast, why the podcast is because when you are traveling, it is really hard to, you don't know where you're going to be at the time of your radio show, my radio show on the Micro Effect. But what I miss most about being on the Micro Effect and a platform like the Micro Effect is the live aspect. Like, we are live right now, and people can call in, and I miss that. I miss that Joe McNeil, who's the producer of the show, and I miss that, Dan. It's a great thing to be live and in action. And because of the projects that I'm working on, it's hard to to know where you're going to be. Some of the things, for example, of being in a place where you don't know, your timing and all of that, are things that I've done with Craig Rucker. We just, before the United Nations conference, Craig and I were in San Francisco, a couple months before we were in San Francisco. Craig Rucker dressed up as Al Gore, and me and Jeanette Finicum and Mark Kerr and my friend Michael Greer, my sister and a few others were dressed up as zombies, and we walked the streets of San Francisco with Craig saying, Craig, I can't remember what you were saying to us, but we were going around as zombies, saying things like, save the earth, stop global warming. Now let me tell you, we were fully dressed as zombies, and it was at Jerry Brown's climate change conference. So, it's hard to have a live radio show when you're doing playing antics like that to stop the whole global warming, craziness that's out there. But the projects that I'm working on include, besides ranching and farming, includes doing deeper research into the carbon tax and what is happening in the agricultural world when it comes to this Agenda 21 sustainable development. And it really is kind of fly by the night. You just don't know what they're going to do. You know where they're going, they being the radical green movement. But they have conferences everywhere. And I have found, and I think Craig may agree, that the best way to get people's attention is to be first-hand information. And just quickly as a preview, when we were at the conference asking attendees, what is the issue that we're here about? Oh, man-made global warming. Well, tell me where there's man-made global warming. These guys cannot answer the question, but they come back every time, oh, the 97%. Well, tell me about the 97%. How did they get to the 97%? Well, all scientists agree. Where's that number? They cannot answer these questions. So anyway, my projects always include how do we expose, this movement and alert the people who we need in this movement. I don't know about you, Craig, but after that conference, I'm pretty concerned about the future more than I've ever been. But you may have taken a different perspective. But anyway, Dan and Joe, thanks for having me on the show, and it's always a pleasure to be with my friend Craig Rucker.
Well, Debbie, I have to tell you, if you were walking around with a group of other people dressed as zombies in San Francisco, I'm sure nobody even noticed, because that seems to be kind of a common theme in San Francisco, is walking around like a zombie listening to Al Gore. Beside that, we'll talk about the COP24 conference, because I will start the discussion with this. I think all of us recognize that UN Agenda 21, sustainable development, and all of these different programs that they're promoting at the UN are designed to do one thing, and that is move us into a communist or Marxist or socialist technocratic government that is controlled under the UN, and it is designed to destroy all personal choices, all liberty, and all rights of individuals, and submit all those to the collective. Now, Craig, I started it with that. I'd love to have you follow up.
I think what you're saying is actually admitted to nowadays by those who are actually running the show. You have people even like Christiana Figueres, who ran the UN's conferences for a number of years, just admitting that they're restructuring the world economy. You have Endor Ottenheimer from the Germany, who also is very involved in this, and he is likewise saying the same thing, that we have to redistribute the world's wealth through climate policies. So, and very much tied up in all these agendas when you go there, and Debbie, we would attest to this, is not just talking about the technocratic and even scientific facts behind climate and climate science, but it's also indigenous people's rights and women's rights and things of that sort. And you'd wonder how this potpourri of liberal causes gets thrown into just something that should be a scientific issue, but it does. You see it also with the Green New Deal, which Cortez is talking about now. This is a broader movement than just the facts about climate science. Nevertheless, we feel it's important that we do address those things. So when we go to these conferences, we try to bring out scientific facts that show the other side. We do try to play the high road, if you would, and address some of the things that they're talked about, as we did with our movie Climate Hustle. And we also have a little bit of fun at it, which is dressing as Al Gore or something, as we just talked about, or in the case of the Polish conference, we actually delivered Greenpeace a lump of Polish coal because they were very naughty this last year, just to get for television and entertainment purposes. So, and to draw attention to our cause. But you're correct. I mean, bottom line is this is about sustainable development. It's about Agenda 21. It's about a broad social and political movement. It's not just about the science.
Right. I think everyone recognizes anymore that the UN is moving very, very quickly toward a synthesis of communism with so-called capitalism. And capitalism has changed so much over the last 50 years that we really don't have capitalism anymore. Now we have corporatism combined with communism and socialism, and by golly, that sounds an awful lot like fascism. But anyway, Debbie, tell us, let's lead in. First of all, I have to say, there was a terrific bunch of articles written by Alex Newman in the New American magazine. And Debbie, there was a great little article in there that you wrote about education. And you guys are both pictured in there. Craig, I see your picture with Mark Morano and Debbie with pictures dressed up when Mark handed the coal out to Greenpeace. This is terrific that we're finally getting this kind of coverage of these conferences. Debbie, tell us about this conference and just exactly why you walked away with such a feeling of trepidation.
Yeah, the article that I put together painstakingly, because it takes me forever to write anything, was about seeing how many children, how many young people, children, when I say children, young people, I'm talking teenagers up to about 30, that I have never seen before the number that we did at this, at COP24, the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, COP24 in Poland, that Craig and I were both at. And, you know, they were filling the halls. I've seen them before. I saw them at Rio Plus 20. Craig and I were at the 2012 reunion, 20-year reunion of Agenda 21, the Earth Summit, and Craig and I were at the Paris conference together. And I have to tell you, plus we've been to eco-cities in Australia. I've been to tons of U.S. Fish and Wildlife meetings, private property rights meetings. I've been to hundreds of conferences, and I have never seen this amount of young people attending and being active at a conference. And it's so for me, and interviewing these young people who are just preaching what they hear, like, oh, in 12 years, if we don't act now, planet Earth will be uninhabitable and unrecognizable. And these kids truly believe it. One of the most extraordinary, sad things that I saw there was, the UN conferences always have an element of kind of like an expo, if you will, kind of like the Red Tail Expo, where you have vendors come in, and a lot of the countries have their own, let's say, vendor table or vendor booth or exhibit area. And the United States, they had one called We Are Still In, and it was shared with the World Wildlife Fund. That's right. And Fiji, so Fiji Islands Pacific Islands had their own booth, their own exhibit space. It was a nice corner lot, if you will. And it was active the entire time. I mean, they were drinking and were celebrating and singing, and having panel discussions, and they were probably the most fun group. So I was there a few times to interview people and check it out. Well, I saw a group of young kids, and we're talking elementary school to probably junior high, maybe high school, but probably elementary and junior high. And they were walking around, and I asked, what are you kids doing here? Well, they're a choir. They were the Katowice choir from Poland, and they were asked to perform at the Pacific Islands. So I find out what time I go at that particular time, And they had the kids sit down, on the floor while the elected bureaucrats from the Pacific Islands lectured them on, and I got this on film, lectured these kids who were wearing gas masks, by the way, the painter's mask, not the full-on gas mask, but, those little painter's masks. And but the bureaucrats lectured them on the islands disappearing if they and their parents didn't start acting now and live a sustainable development lifestyle. And then after this 7-minute lecture, the kids were asked to be backup singers for a professional German singer who opened up their show with a video. There was a video screen on the side, and the video was all kinds of climate catastrophes and children being used to, you could tell they were trying to save planet Earth. Well, they sang about they can't breathe, and the kids took off their masks and were singing backup with this professional singer. And I thought, how dare you? This is a lie, by the way. And Craig could tell you the specifics on, how much the sea is rising. Craig, I think it's like 3 inches by the year 2100. You could correct me on that. But that was, Dan, the hardest thing for me to see is how much the youth were being used. And Craig can talk about the interruption that happened during the Trump administration's presentation on the many benefits of a mixed energy use, even including coal and nuclear, and what happened there. I have never been so upset with adults for indoctrinating the youth as I was at this conference. And to me, I think they're the future. And they are just walking, talking, Al Gore. And that is not a joke, not a joke. And there were hundreds. And they filled the halls, and you couldn't get through some of the halls. They would start out in doing what we call, human mic. Human mic is where somebody says, stop global warming, and then the rest of the crowd says stop global warming. But what they were yelling is stolen land. Stolen land. What's stolen land? Well, they claim with the youth joined with the indigenous people almost on everything, and we're just talking about stolen land. What's stolen land? The United States. So there is a movement now called Stolen Land, where the indigenous people of in the United States are claiming all areas of the United States as theirs and stolen land, and the youth are going along with this as well. And to me, it's just like, where do you stop, especially as a cattle rancher? And, we know that there were Indians prior to the settlers who came on our land. So where does it stop? So anyway, I hope that.
Well, Debbie, one of the things that comes out of this whole movement is a lack of respect for the rights of individuals or property rights. And you mentioned the attacks against the Trump administration that happened there. Craig, I know you were there when they did that. And how many of these young people realize that if you didn't get the oil out of the ground, they wouldn't be in Poland at a conference like this, because I'm sure they flew there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I laugh at these sorts of things because one of our favorite memes we put on Facebook, on our Facebook page for CPAC, showed a bunch of kayakers going out to protest petroleum in kayaks made of petroleum. And that seems to be the case with all these different things that the youth are doing. They are somewhat clueless on this particular thing when it comes to climate change or much of the other science. I have said, working with the students around the world, really, we have our own collegiate program. We just had a student leader summit down in Port Charlotte, Florida recently. The good news in all this is a lot of these beliefs are kind of a mile wide and an inch deep. That is, they've been trained to believe the climate change, slogans and things of that sort. but it's not a deep-rooted belief for a lot of them. There are some that do have that, but a good many of them are just going along with the program and more interested in the next party they're going to, or who they're dating, or what movie's coming out that's the Avengers or something like that. They're not necessarily committed wholeheartedly, and if confronted with facts, usually not once, it usually takes it's a process, they can slowly start to shift their paradigm. The youth is, and I agree wholeheartedly, Debbie just nails this all the time when she goes there. She sees it correctly. There's a lot to be concerned about, and I think she's correct, principally because of the future generation, and we really have not had a good answer for the educators and those that are pumping this nonsense into the next generation. The good news in this particular conference is that there were some chinks in the armor that surfaced. One of them was the fact that the IPCC, which is a leading body of science that usually issues a report right prior to all of these conferences, and it makes headlines around the world, that report, which said we had until 2030 to change our ways or we'll all die, was not adopted this time. The United States, Russia, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia prevented it, stepped in and prevented it with tacit help also from Brazil to make sure that that was not adopted. That's unprecedented and really upset the Greens, because it was kind of a fait accompli. Once the UN own scientific body makes a pronouncement or comes up with a report, it's supposed to be believed by everybody, but it wasn't. And this is the first time, I've been to over 20 of these conferences, that the UN's own report was not adopted. You had Australia and the United States. They actually had coal exhibits right in the heart of the climate change conference. I found that kind of curious. Brazil was supposed to host next year's COP. The COP meeting, the one that was just held in Poland, is supposed to next year take place in Brazil. The new president declined and said he does not want to put it in. And in fact, his environment minister said he could almost be on this program, said that the whole climate change issue is an attempt to, put out socialism and hurt the markets and benefit China. So there were some things that occurred in this particular conference that kind of had me shaking my head. Most distressing, though, is, as Debbie said, the youth. They are the ones to whom the U.S. to whom the Greens are really putting a lot of stock in, and that's where the efforts of those who are on the pro-freedom side really need to focus in the next few years, or the battle will be lost.
Well, Craig, one of the good things about the youth being indoctrinated and involved in the way they are is that having been one of those rowdy youths, I would go along with some of these programs because mainly, that's where the girls were, right? Exactly. So that's why you'd go to this stuff. But the reality is, I think you're right. A lot of them go along just because it's the popular, it's the right thing to do according to, the rest of the youth. But in fact, I don't think they're really that committed to this stuff. And once they start figuring this out, I know a lot of young people, the harder someone pushes them to believe something, the less likely they are to believe it. I know I was certainly that way. And I hope they do turn up the heat and really start pushing a lot of these programs, because when they do, they're going to turn a lot of these young people off.
I couldn't agree with you more. That's why we have a collegiate program. That's why we make a big impact for youth. But obviously, the climate curricula, in fact, the environmental curricula is being mandated for teachers. Again, a lot of the teachers, yes, they may have left-leaning sentiments, but they're just trying to adopt the learning standards that are handed them by the state. And that's where a new battleground is taking place. We were successful a couple of years ago in getting West Virginia to change its standards to allow for climate skepticism to go into the classroom. I don't know if it's actually been taken up by the teachers yet, but we at least have the license to go in and show another side of the story. But in most school districts around the country, and I'm sure it's definitely the case in California, you can't teach all sides of the story regarding a scientific issue. And because of that, when you go up to somebody, a young person in particular, and tell them that climate change is, there's many scientists from Harvard, from MIT, from NASA that dispute the consensus on climate change. They look at you like you may as well have just told them that the moon landing was staged or something that, whatever. They just think it's, water boils at 212 degrees, it freezes at 32 degrees, and of course our cars and SUVs are killing polar bears. That's just what they've been taught, and they haven't questioned it. That's why the challenge remains that we have to go out there, reach these young people, and show them the other side of the story.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, and I think that the fact that so many of these youth now, the adults that keep talking about how stupid the young people are, how ill-equipped and all that, the fact is that the young people today have greater access to information, and I believe they're more intelligent than ever. It's just a matter of being ignorant of facts because of our education system. So it's really up to us to provide the change, the impetus to make the facts available to them, to make reality available to them, because these young people are really, really very bright, most of them. Sounds like we're moving into a break. Let's pick it up on the other side of the break, and let's see what we can do to expose UN Agenda 21.
This is The Micro Effect. The Micro Effect. www.themicroeffect.com.
You really understand sometimes what a terrible burden it is to know some of the things that I know. And try to wake people up and impart this knowledge to them. And find out that they just have walls built in front of them. They want to be slaves.
Now I risk sounding like a conspiracy theorist, but it's no longer a theory. What I'm about to say is fact. The secret organizations of the world power elite are no longer secret. They have planned and are now leading us into a one-world communist government.
Well, welcome back to Connecting the Dots with Dan Happel, and today we have Craig Rucker and Debbie Boscalupi on as our guests. And I have to say that last little recording, my friend Stan Jones, he and I were actually in a flying club together in Three Forks, and Stan Jones ran for governor in Montana in, I believe it was 2008, and I have to tell you that Stan was one of the bravest people I've ever seen, and he talked about the New World Order when it was completely unpopular to talk about it, and he's a terrific guy. Anyway, I want to get back to the COP24 conference. Antonio Guterres, the chairman of this group, talked about his priorities being ambition. Craig, what did he mean by that?
Well, I think that one of the things that has befuddled them up to this point, and I do give a testimony to the good work of Debbie and there's other groups, CFAC of course, but the Heartland Institute, CEI, and others, that has been kind of a cog in their wheel for a number of years. The Kyoto Treaty, of course, the U.S. never signed. The Paris Accord is something that was signed but was very broadly, it was basically a document that didn't have any enforcement mechanisms in it. And so that was one of the things that heading into this, they wanted to, ambition was to get something locked down. And they did create a rule book during this particular conference. It was mostly on reporting and things of how you measure commitments of whether they're being kept or not, things of that sort. I did find it curious that when you look at this rule book, in 260 places, and this is actually coming from a fairly liberal source, and they were rejoicing over this, they replaced the word should to shall. which means that countries shall do this, and it will be more of a unified way of reporting. And they get excited when countries are forced to do something and aren't given flexibility. And I think, sadly, a lot of the flexibility countries had to meet their carbon targets was taken away in Poland. And not that I think any of it should be done, of course. I think we wisely withdrew from the Paris Accord, and we applaud Trump for doing that. Nevertheless, that is what he's talking about. He's talking about tightening the screws down, forcing nations to comply. Very importantly, too, in their ambitious plans is funding. There's generous amounts of money that are being given to the United Nations and to climate programs in general, and a lot of that was doled out in Poland. Thus far, the Global Climate Fund, which is supposed to give away about $100 billion annually, I think it's only collected about $10 billion or something. The last figure I saw is May of last year. So they haven't even made their first $100 billion to dole out. But the World Bank committed that between 2021 and 2025, it'll be handing out some $200 billion in money toward climate programs around the world. That is a serious amount of cash. So Debbie's concern about the direction of this because of the young people, I think, is one big reason to be concerned. I think another big one is the money that is being doled out. And I honestly think that may even be as larger than the control in some portions of this. The money is driving a lot of this particular issue, and I think sustainable development. People are getting rich off of this, and this is a big aspect if you want to understand what the UN is trying to achieve.
Well, I know that at the same time that this conference was going on, there were riots in the streets in France because of the French president announcing that they were going to greatly increase the carbon tax on fuel and increase the price of fuel. And people were just going nuts over that. That didn't help the conference a whole lot, having that kind of a thing in the background while the conference was going on, did it?
No, Dan, I'll tell you, I had an opportunity. The conference took place over 2 weeks. And in between those 2 weeks, most of the delegates take the weekend off and go sightseeing. It's one of the perks the UN has when they put their conferences in exotic parts of the world. We took ours to go to Marseille, France. And we got a chance, actually, I do speak some French, and got in with some of the people who were the Gilets jaunes. I found it curious when I was driving through France at that time that I didn't pay for one parking toll. They had commandeered all of them, and everybody got to drive the highway system in France for free for that weekend anyway. In meeting with them, they reminded me very much of our Tea Party here in the United States. These were cooks, they were plumbers, they were carpenters, they were the working class. And they were concerned that the chômage, the heating, and the essence, the gas prices were going through the roof, and they understood it was connected to a carbon tax and the very aggressive policies to combat climate change that Emmanuel Macron was putting on the French people. We were in a protest in Marseille, very peacefully done. I found that there was no violence on the part of the protesters whatsoever, yet we were met by what looked like stormtroopers from the movie Star Wars. They actually started marching and getting in our faces. We had one woman bravely go up, like in Tiananmen Square, and stand in front of one of their armored vehicles and brought it to a halt. We have that on film at cfac.org. And I myself even got some tear gas thrown at us just for peacefully protesting. I do think the French people get it. I think the Gilets jaunes, when they show the violence that's going on there, have been infiltrated, just like the Tea Party was in several occasions to tarnish their reputation. But my hope is that is the start, or the spark, that may spread to other countries, and the real impacts of carbon and decarbonization policies are starting to come home to roost. And I think hopefully it's not too late.
Mm-hmm. Well, I have to say, we had Bill Jasper and Mark Sutherland on a couple of weeks ago, and we talked about how around the world there is a resistance to all this crazy stuff. And the fact that Brazil went from Dilma Rousseff, who was a card-carrying communist, as their president, to an individualist who is very much a capitalist, and they canceled next year's conference in Brazil, is an indication that people are finally starting to wake up. And I'm kind of thinking this COP24 conference may have been more of a wake-up call than anything else.
It is. They are deceiving the people, and I think they've bought off. They've come up with this trick. Actually, I first saw it in Canada, and I think Macron pulled this one out of his hat, where they're starting to realize the costs of the high prices of gasoline, the high prices of heating, and all that. And what they're planning to do now is actually take from the rich and give to the poor. He's giving empathy to the Gilets jaunes, saying, yes, you are paying too much. We need to have you give you more government. The solution is more government. Checks coming in to help you pay for your gas and help you pay for your high heating and things of that sort. And that is a interesting response to it. It did work briefly in Alberta, which is something that government did as well. But the good news in that, it usually is a short-term solution, like most socialistic programs, because then people realize, as Margaret Thatcher once said, it's socialism always works until basically the money runs out from the pockets you're trying to get it from. So that's, I'm paraphrasing there, but that's essentially what I think is going to happen.
Yeah, I think you're right. Now, China came away from this conference as being like the big dog, the fair-haired child of UN Agenda 21 of sustainability, and because the United States is being vilified as, under the Trump administration as being anti-New World Order, envisioning the world as it should be under their utopian dreams. And I know that China's CO2 emissions are now more than double those of the United States, and they grew by 120 million tons just in the last year, and the United States emissions declined by 40 million tons. So since capitalism is such a bad thing and communism is such a wonderful thing, why are the factors turning completely on their head, and why are the Chinese now being favored and given all these special compensations when in fact they're the biggest polluter in the world by far?
I'll let Debbie speak to part of this as well, but I found that also remarkable at this conference. And China held out that it wanted to be still treated as a developing nation, and to my knowledge, they still are, and they prevailed in that. I did not see much anger at this conference against China at all. And so I find it remarkable that if indeed climate change is supposed to be a real problem, you would go after the biggest cause of that problem, which would be China, followed by India. And to my knowledge, and Debbie, you can correct me, did you see much anger or angst or people being upset about China?
No, in fact, it's shocking how California and China are always praised at these conferences. And look, I'm from California, and we have industry fleeing California and going to much more business-friendly states. But China and California are the leaders in this new green, or not new, but this new world order and this new Green Deal. Panel discussion after panel discussion. Even at the earlier conference that I went to in February of last year, the United Nations Habitat 9 conference, Cities for All, praised California and praised China as the leaders, as the, who should you be watching in this movement? It's mind-boggling. It is absolutely mind-boggling. But, the only thing that I can come up with, guys, is that, China is so powerful that, perhaps they're afraid of China. I don't know. I don't get it.
The only thing I can think of, Debbie, and I found that it goes back to the conversation about money. If you look at the Global Climate Fund, the biggest contributor is the United States, but they do it on a per capita basis, and then it comes out that maybe Sweden or some other country actually gave more if you did it by individual. They have some cockamamie scheme on that. I think the UN recognizes that China will give them some money, but the real deep pockets are in the West, in the United States, and in Europe. And so I think that they feel if they apply pressure to the United States and Europe, politicians will buckle under, throw them a bunch of dollars, whereas China's not exactly known for buckling under to anybody, and they're unlikely to gain much by giving them a rough time. That's my theory, but, you know, it's tough to tell.
Mm-hmm. Well, Craig and Debbie, I have to say this. I think it's because communism is what this whole program is all about, is promoting communism worldwide. And since China is the biggest openly communist country in the world, naturally they're going to get a free pass by the group that are promoting communism.
Maybe a combination of all these factors. Tough to tell.
You know, one thing that after the Malaysia conference, we headed over to Shanghai, and it was, so at the Malaysia conference, what was a big topic of conversation was surveillance. In fact, that was one of the exhibit spaces that I saw was a full wall of televisions, of monitors, and even, you know, with facial recognition that would tie you to your license plate, even though you might not even be at your car, and how the government, the Malaysian government, was so excited about these new surveillance programs, copying China and copying London, on how, you know, people could be arrested in 7 seconds. And we know that under the Green Movement, if you pollute, you will pay. And Jerry Brown said that he's excited for his satellite to be launched, which will, you know, 24/7 tell us where the polluters are. So, you know, China is a leader in technocracy, in this technology, you know, that would smart grid and the surveillance system. And I was shocked to see about 40 cameras on every street corner. That's not 40 cameras total in a, you know, where two streets come together. That's 40 at each section. So there were over 100 cameras at each intersection in China, and it is daunting. But, you know, it seems to be working for China.
Well, and if you add that too, I know in England they just introduced legislation that they want to give tax credits to those who have sustainable lifestyles. With that sort of surveillance, one could, it wouldn't take much for one to think up or conjure up an idea where if somebody throws a tin can in the wrong recycling bin, or eats red meat, or does something that drives a car that has too much exhaust or something like that, this type of stuff would be more easily surveyed than it would be, you know, in a free society where such things might have limitations.
Mm-hmm. Well, I know, too, that the EPA, this is an old statistic now, but the EPA were the biggest order of drones in the United States, and this is about 4 years ago. They actually had somewhere in the neighborhood of 20,000 drones ordered by the EPA to monitor what farmers, ranchers, and people in the country are doing.
Yeah, it may sound far-fetched, but look at all the things that we're talking about now that we all on this call on this interview have been talking about for, you know, myself for the last 15 years, you, Dan, and Craig for, you know, twice that. Look at all the things we used to talk about: globalization, a carbon tax, taxing water, all these things that are now coming through, wealth redistribution. De Blasio just mentioned that the wealth in New York City is in the wrong hands, so they need to figure out how to get it in the right hands. So all these things that people have called us Chicken Little and, oh yeah, conspiracy theorists, they're all here right now. So at what point are the American people going to say, okay, I get it, I got it, I'm ready to act, I'm ready to get involved? But we're not seeing that. In fact, Craig, that was one of the depressing things that I saw at this conference. I'm sorry, call me Debbie Downer for a reason. Was the too few people in support of freedom and liberty at the United Nations conference. I mean, Craig, there were 15 or less of us there at a conference that was 32,000 people.
And I would agree with you, Debbie. But again, I guess I look at these things as kind of like an NRA convention on the right. You're going to get the true believers at this. This is their big song and dance each year. And the environmental ministers come from the various countries. They bring, their people, and they have a good time, and they talk a little bit of this politics stuff. But for the most part, I would actually say that one of the more depressing things, and I'm not going to add you in the Debbie Downer category, is that those of us who are there that know better, and I put the Trump administration in this category, who has done wonderfully in terms of getting us out of Paris and reining in some of the EPA excess, they would not challenge the science other than to get rid of the IPCC report. But this is an opportunity, as one of the funders of this confab, to bring in scientists who actually can speak to the issues of sea level rise, polar bears, ice core melt, all the things that the Greens, increased storminess. All these things are a fraud and can be disproven by very competent scientists from very respected institutions, and there has just not been the willpower by anybody, maybe save Brazil, to come out and actually challenge the fundamental basis of why they're even gathering.
Well, Craig, one of the things that comes to my mind is always the same thing at every one of these conferences, is that their side has the money. They get the funding because there are forces at work in our world that want this to be a fact, and they want to control everything, and they are putting an enormous amount of money behind this, and our side just doesn't have the kind of funding that they have, and that's something I'd really like to get into discussion about.
If I could add into that, CFAC is one of the few, if not the only organization that keeps consistently showing up to these things to not only stick a, pin in their balloon over, at these conferences, their helium balloon, but which is unsustainable, by the way, but also to come back and report to the United States what's going on. And that happens when Craig has me join them. It's because listeners, supporters of CFAC, friends are donating money to, for us to show up at these, for Craig and Mark to show up at these conferences. And I want to add one more thing, if I can, back to the last conversation. Mark Morano, Climate Depot, partner with Craig in all the great things that CFAC is doing, said that, you know what, the only person speaking, besides us little people, sorry, Craig, you're not little, but besides us smaller
Debbie, I hear a break coming up, and we're going to need to break, but Craig, could you join us at least for a little while on the other side of the break so that we can talk about the money and talk about CFAC and how we can help support your efforts?
Sure.
This is The Micro Effect. The Micro Effect. www.themicroeffect.com.
You take the blue pill. The story ends. You wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to believe. You take the red pill. You stay in Wonderland. And I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes.
There was a mighty nation, blessed above all of creation. It was a rare and precious pearl, conceived in faith and liberty, home of the brave, land of the free. It was the envy of the world. But this shining city on a hill has turned from the Creator's will and let evil take control.
Well, welcome back to Connecting the Dots Dots with Dan Happel, and today I have two very special guests on this program, Craig Rucker from CFACT and Debbie Bacigalupi, and we were having a discussion about the COP24 conference, and we were, when we left for the break, we were talking about money. And before we get into that discussion, I want to remind our listeners, every single network, every single group like ours depends on the funding of other people to help make sure that these programs are available and to make sure that we stay on the air. Incredibly important that people support, fund, help us with all these efforts. If you do not do it, no one else will. And the fact is that the reason we have been losing so much ground in this battle is because they have unlimited funding on their side to take away our liberty, and we have very limited funding on our side to make sure that we keep our liberty. Craig, you were talking about that. Go ahead and finish that thought, please.
Yes, I was going to say that I think that this whole issue, to a large degree, comes down to power and money, which is what we discussed before. And when you are looking at the climate change issue, there are winners and losers. The winners are the United Nations bureaucracy. It's the Greens, and it's certain individuals, political leaders like Al Gore, who stand to make, literally, they call them climate or carbon billionaires if the scheme is rigged, and all those in the renewable energy industry who are raking in lots of money by these government mandates, and China, who is also winning because as industries hemorrhage from the West because they don't have to abide by these climate rules, they gain. The losers are the common folks, and it's particularly the developing nations. They are hurt the worst because they aren't able to develop, and the people will remain in poverty without the benefits of fossil fuels and cheap energies that we enjoy, and also the working class in the United States, Europe, and in France, the Gilets jaunes and people like that, who will be forced to pay higher prices, lose jobs, and suffer with the loss of their livelihoods. And really, that to me is what this is about. It's kind of a new feudalism, and will be the kind of the theme of our upcoming movie, which we call Climate Monarchy, kind of a return to the days of the feudal system where you have a lot of privileged elite and a lot of serfs. And if you aren't in that privileged elite, you will be suffering.
Well, I'm looking forward to hearing a little bit more about that movie, because that's exactly what we have is the communism and the Marxism and socialism is being used as a tool to really consolidate power. When they win that battle, then they can get into their techno-feudalism, which is very tight control of our whole society by a very, very select and small group of people. And I'm looking forward to hearing more about your movie.
Well, should be due out. We're going to probably finish it up this year and have it come out next year. Our last movie, Climate Hustle, which is still available for purchase at cfact.org, was the #1 movie in America for one night. It was actually attacked by Jimmy Kimmel on The Tonight Show for 7 minutes. And we sold out in many venues across the country. It was on over 400 theaters that day. Our hope is, and we were approached by the film company, that they wanted to do 800 theaters this next time because they were so happy with the last one, despite their misgivings about the issue, because they didn't agree. Hollywood doesn't agree with maybe our message, but they do agree with the money. So they are willing to give it another run. So we are excited about that. It'll be called Climate Monarchy 2, Climate Hustle 2, Rise of the Monarchy.
Sounds good. I have to tell you, Craig, my wife and I and a number of our friends were some of those folks that attended that 400 theater one night showing. I mean, it was terrific, and the comments at the end of it were just amazing, because there were a lot of people that were there that didn't have any idea about how totally corrupt the whole climate change process was, and you guys did a terrific job on that movie. So I look forward to the next one. I'll make sure that we're part of the group that goes to the 800 theaters to see that one as well. Debbie, I know you're involved with a lot of this stuff and understand the money better than an awful lot of people when it comes to the who's funding all this stuff. I'd like your input in how exactly they are using the money tree to control the whole process.
Well, part of it is through retirement systems. Like if you're a California state employee, helpers, the California pension, these investments, these retirement systems, Harvard has one, New York City has one, I think Cornell University is connected through something called an ESG, Environmental Social Governance. And what ESG is, it's Agenda 21. It's environmental is that corporations, companies, investment firms must only support manufacturing firms that follow in the green dynamics, the renewable energy dynamics, including something that Craig brushed on earlier, which, this new world, this new urban agenda is what it's called, the 2030 agenda, besides Agenda 21, besides the Paris Agreement and the Kyoto Protocol, all those things mixed together. The companies must now support only manufacturing companies or businesses that are green, but also follow the social part of, the whole, Craig mentioned that everything now is thrown into the mix. It is, and part of that is your company must support transgender, gender identity and all of that. That is part of the social governance part of it, as well as having open books so that the public, and they've stated this, they being Christiana Figueres, in the, I'm forgetting, in the Montreal Pledge, is what they said is that all organizations must implement Agenda 21. In fact, it is their fiduciary duty to support Agenda 21, and that is in their document called Follow the Money. So they specifically stated in these investment firms that their fiduciary duty is to support Agenda 21, and if an organization, a manufacturing company, does not follow this environmental social governance, then what they will do is they will either drop that organization, like Coca-Cola, for example. They'll drop that organization in their portfolio, and which is going to hurt the company, and they will do a public outcry against these companies who do not follow Agenda 21 sustainable development. That money in the stock market is used to help fund towards green initiatives. So the goal is $100 trillion to the United Nations to support their whole new world utopia about green energy. And I have to throw in here right now Mark Morano's book called what is it, Craig? The politically incorrect guide to climate change. Is that correct, Craig?
Yes, that's correct.
When I was driving through Europe for a good 13 hours, I could not turn. I bought the Audible version of the politically incorrect guide to climate change. And let me tell you, with Craig's help, Mark Morano has put together a tool for us to use to talk about everything from the money aspect, Dan, all the way down to the supposed 97%. It is a phenomenal resource to fight back with consensus says, all scientists say. And I hope everybody listening to this will go right now to Amazon or wherever and order
this book. No, you want them to go to cfac.org, because then it supports us, and we sell it for $1 cheaper than Amazon.
Oh, perfect. So there you go. Go to CFAC, and it's a great interim until Craig's next movie comes out. but get it and listen to it. In fact, I have to listen to it a second time and a third time. I'm not kidding. Driving Christmas, I had my niece up to the ranch. I had my niece who's in a school, Alabama, that's just indoctrinating them with green crap. I had my niece listen to it. I'm not kidding. She was so inspired by it. She was taking notes the entire 4-hour drive up to the ranch. It was phenomenal.
Well, that's how we're going to do it, Debbie, is by really telling the truth to these young people and providing them with the kind of resources that CPAC has at their disposal to really spread the truth, spread the word of the truth. Now, Craig, I know you're busy. You had indicated that you needed to break at some point. Please feel free to do that. However, I'd love to have you on as long as you can be here. I would like to get your input on the term social justice, because even as a former county commissioner, every time there was a federal program that came out with so-called grant money, the term social justice was required as part of the requirements to get that grant funding. Let's talk about social justice.
Well, you'll find, and again, this might actually be a better question for Debbie, but and I'm not allowed to talk about this. I guess have to put out in the open there. I'm a white male, so I don't know as though my opinion matters on that issue as much, at least according to the left. But essentially, you find with social justice a real, it's a pretty big topic at all these climate change conferences. Certainly was in Poland. And what they are trying to work in, it's kind of a liberal grab bag issue. Anything that deals with gender bias, racial bias, things of that sort as they pertain to climate. For example, the rich white Westerners are polluting the planet, and people who are indigenous from developing countries get hit harder. They have something called loss and damage, which is part of the social justice scheme where countries that are rich have to pay for part of the damage caused by that hurricane, because it wouldn't have been as strong if it hit the Philippines than it would be if you weren't driving your SUV. The location of coal facilities and toxic plants in poorer communities, they say, is spewing out toxins and that disproportionately affect them, and therefore they should get compensation for that. They work this in almost to a ridiculous level. We kind of joked when we were at the last conference that they were talking that the entire world, according to the latest UN IPCC report, would largely be annihilated by 2030. So basically all of humanity will die, but according to the UN, women and children will be the most adversely impacted, even if we all die. We're not sure how that works, but that's in their mind how they do it. And I think this allows them opportunity to rail against the status quo, against our Western traditional values, and it provides a basis of support, and particularly handouts. This Global Green Climate Fund, which is supposed to be $100 billion, will disproportionately go to developing countries or people of color. And so by bandying about the social justice and things of that card, these countries entitle themselves to receiving that, and we entitle ourselves to paying that. And I think that a lot of it is also locked up in the money angle. So that's what I have to say about it, but I'm sure you followed that. We actually have people on our staff that I tend to assign to go to those meetings that look less conspicuous than me, so you might have more to add.
Well, I do know that something that was heavily emphasized is animals and meat-eating countries, and we need justice for the animals. And so it is a big conversation. The stolen land, the rights of women. It's always the same at these conferences, but like Craig's saying, it gets heated up conference over conference. In fact, they throw more things in that are considered social justice as time goes on, and But the funny thing, not really funny, but the sad thing for the youth at this conference was that they felt that their voices were not being heard at this last conference. And so as the conference that I was there with Craig the second week. Heartland Institute was at the conference the first week, so you can look to Heartland Institute and find out what they accomplished while they were there. Some interesting speakers that they brought over to Poland to talk about what the UN was up to. But the children were really upset. The kids, the youth, were really upset that their voices weren't being heard. In fact, they're really upset that they're not even included in the rule book, and now they're calling that part of social justice. So I imagine that at the next conference in Chile, the global warming conference is going to be Chile. That's so funny. I imagine we're going to see a lot more youth claiming social justice of everything, whether it's animals or land or gender and bathrooms and whatever else they can come up with under the sun as part of their social justice movement. It is a big movement because everybody loves the puppy in the window.
And I would also say that, as I said, going back, when you actually press them, what does it mean to be heard? Oftentimes it comes down to dollars. We are heard when X number of dollars gets put into loss and damage. So then they're heard. But short of that, even though they're given prominent spots in the entire conference, and you can't avoid seeing their tables, you can't avoid seeing their special workshops and things like that. If anything is heard at this conference, it is the social justice angle, and it is indigenous peoples, women, etc. So I don't get quite why they are making this claim they aren't heard. I think they're pretty much one of the only ones being heard from.
Yeah, I think you're right. Let's really explore how we can work with the youth to change this whole dynamic. And Greg, I know your CFACT has an outreach program for university students. I'd like to hear your opinion, and Debbie, certainly you're an expert on this as well, but I'd like your opinions on what would be the best approach to get young people to listen to the reality of the world the way it is, and how all these things that are being promoted are going to impact their lives in a way that won't be very happy as they reach adulthood.
Our approach with collegians as a model is more to, it sounds kind of strange to say this, but it's kind of based off the left. I think one of the things the right has made a mistake on is not our message. Our message is a correct one, but our approach. A lot of times the left makes their issue fun to a degree. They'll have rock concerts. Back in my day, it was no nuke concerts. And they would invite, bands like Aerosmith and Heart and others there, and they'd hand out their propaganda during the beginning of it. They would do protests. They would have things that aren't exactly intellectually, stimulating, like sitting down in a boring conference listening to speaker after speaker, which is what the right tends to do. So when we have our eco summits, or when we do stuff with students, we try to engage them and take them out in nature, hear from experts, do some of the classroom training, but provide for a lot of fun. We just did one down in Florida where we took them out on to see manatees, talked about stewardship and how mankind has a stewardship role. It's not this deep green ecology, but taking care of the environment is a good thing. Even the Bible declares, we're to be good stewards of the planet. So from our perspective, inculcating that in them in a way that is entertaining, engaging, and they're very into, as everyone knows, almost to an annoying level, anything social media-wise or internet savvy. So I think trying to reach them through the means that they are accustomed to is a good start to try and reach out to the next generation. Yeah,
I agree. And one of the things that the right has done that I think is a very, very bad move is talking about how these young people are missing the point. They're so stupid. You're not going to attract young people by marginalizing what you say about their intelligence or their ability. Fact is, young people in this country, I think they have more potential than we ever had, and it's just a matter of presenting them with the facts and with reality. And you're right, doing it in a way isn't boring and isn't dogmatic and things that are not any fun. Do it in a way that, like the left has been famous for doing, and that is making it fun. Debbie, you've spent a lot of time on this. Talk to us about how you see this happening.
Yeah, no, I love this. This inspires me, this topic, because I've had a few success stories, including with my own niece who went with me to the UN Habitat Conference in Malaysia last year. And my niece was, I know, clearly thought, she was embarrassed by me, and it was evident before we went to Malaysia with her 8 roommates that she was embarrassed with, of her aunt talking about the UN while her roommates were all excited about the UN, to the point that my niece told me to knock it off. And I was in tears before Malaysia, just going, why am I even bringing my ungrateful niece, is what was going through my head. Well, she went with me to one of the United Nations meetings in Malaysia about transportation. Now, my niece is 23 years old, loves her car. And there was a point in the panel discussion where they said, they're being the people pushing this agenda are very open about their agenda these days. It's extraordinary. There's no more secrecy, if you ask me. But at one point they said, yes, and that will help get people out of their cars permanently. And my niece grabs my arm and whispers, oh my gosh, Aunt, they do want us out of our cars. And man, oh man, you guys, what a turning point for me in my conversations with my niece, to the point when we got back to the United States, I had a presentation to give in Los Angeles right near her, where she was living at the time, and she showed up with friends where I had spoken many times in that area, and my niece was nowhere to be found. So she showed up and even stood up in a large room in front of people she didn't know and said how proud she was of what her aunt was doing. At the United Nations COP24 conference that Craig and I were just at, I approached the young people, and as they were telling me that fossil fuels, we've got to keep it in the ground, and plastic is bad, and we've got to move to a vegan diet. Craig knows this about me. I'll go around to these conferences and show them what a hypocrite they are, as they tout their vegan line, that you are not vegan. Did you know that your vegetable bicycle has livestock, tires? And how are you going to get around when your tires, which are made of livestock byproducts, glue, for example, is livestock. The clue is in the glue. Elmer is a cow. So as I bring these things up with the youth, with the younger people, they're like, whoa. One woman was talking to me about not having children. She was, in fact, from Santa Barbara, California, now going to a green school in Fiji. She was one of the performers, not the choir performers, but she did a song and dance. She was probably in her mid-teens. Did a song and dance about the environment and saving the environment. Pretty blonde girl. And so she was telling me how women should not be having babies. And I said, okay, so I'm almost 50. I've never had children, and I cried in this conversation. I was teared up. I said, I would love to have a child, but I can't. So what do you say about to people like me? It is a woman response. It's an innate response to want to have a baby and hold a baby and take care of one. And she started crying too. And she's like, well, okay. And she flipped. She said, okay, I don't think we need to all be vegan. And she said, yeah, and I want to have a baby too. And my response was, well, under this agenda, you cannot have a baby. You will not be allowed to have a baby unless the government says it's okay. Are you okay with this? So there are little wins, and I think it's one by one, just like Jesus did. You know, sometimes we're lucky enough to have a group who wants to listen to what we have to say, but I think it is our duty of freedom and liberty to touch every person we can, whether we're in a grocery store line, talking about the ridiculousness of buying a plastic bag for all my groceries that are, you know, safely covered in plastic and my plastic toothbrush, to talking to a child or a young person who says that we are bad people because we breathe, we have carbon, and we use carbon on planet Earth. I think and every day is an opportunity to share with, you know, somebody that you're near. I turn almost every grocery store, Tractor Supply line, whatever, you know, while I'm waiting to pay for my planet polluting products. I use that opportunity to make some remark that's going to spark a conversation, to educate, communicate, that do not hibernate.
And do not be afraid. One of the things I have noticed too about the youth is that the times change, and a lot of times we don't. What appealed to us back a long time ago, I remember we could argue about the Soviet Union, how evil it is and everything like that, and people kind of understood that for the most part. Today that doesn't speak to young people. That's a generation, you may as well be talking about the Ming Dynasty in China or something like that. It's so far back and they don't understand what that's about. You have to talk about the debate in the current context, which really, for the very young people, only goes back as far as Obama and now into Trump. Sometimes the left will take a figure like Bill Nye the Science Guy, who's an icon of young people for the purposes of trying to reach the generation. And I remember when Mark Morano had to go against him, we were a little bit wondering how to handle that because he was so idolized by kids, and it was a very clever ploy on the part of the left to bring out such a figure to try and reach the current generation. However, I told him not to take it easy on Bill Nye. If he's going to step into the ring, we have to treat him like in a boxing match. We have to go all out on him, and it proved to be a good thing. And I think Bill Nye has not been as effective as he could have been had we not taken him on so aggressively. So I would say that it never pays to be afraid to attack or to aggressively defend your beliefs, but do so in a way that actually means something to this generation, and refrain from doing things that just maybe speak to yourself and to an older generation.
Right. Craig, I hate to interrupt, but we need to go to a commercial break, but please pick that up on the other side of the break.
This is The Micro Effect. The Micro Effect. www.themicroeffect.com.
Well, welcome back to Connecting the Dots with Dan Happel, and today my guests on the radio show are Debbie Boscalupi and Craig Rucker. And Craig, you were talking about Bill Nye the Science Guy, and in fact, my understanding, Bill Nye is not even a scientist. He's like a communications guy. And so you're right. What we need to do is we need to expose the illegitimacy of the left. And this is a great way to do it is don't be afraid to say what you think. Don't be afraid when you have the facts on your side.
I agree. We try as best we can, and I think Debbie would attest to this, to use kind of the Reagan style of humor and wittiness to try to go against them, but in good taste, look with facts. And I think if you visit the CFAC website, that kind of has our way of doing things along with the way we work things in collegians. So and you may have gathered that by our Al Gore stunt that we did and giving Greenpeace coal. Always backed up, though, with some sort of message that kind of gets the main view across. I think this attracts young people. They enjoy that. They like those types of YouTube videos. They like that type of style, and it's just an effective one. And I think it disarms the left. Bill Nye's not used to it. He's used to being treated with kid gloves. And the left is not used to being laughed at. And there's really no defense against being laughed at. Even Saul Alinsky, who wrote his famous Rules for Radicals, mentioned that there's really no defense against people laughing. So in that regard, I think we could use a little more of that.
I agree. Debbie, I know this is an area, I have to say, I've gone to conferences where you were there, and you always attract the young people. They automatically move toward you. So talk in terms that we can really utilize those kind of skills to get to the young people.
Well, it really is that just approaching, being fearless and approaching the youth, and they are our future. So if we ignore them because we're afraid to approach them, or we don't think that they're going to relate to our age or whatever it is a missed opportunity for freedom and liberty. And I think it is a crime to indoctrinate these kids and the youth into believing that what they do, what their parents do, what we do, using the resources of planet Earth that Almighty God gave us stewardship of, that using those natural resources, those wonderful resources made by human beings, is destroying planet Earth, and now it's their responsibility to save planet Earth. So when they talk about, so for me, it's just like Craig said, being fearless, but also knowing if we don't approach people, whether young or old or whatever, that it is a missed opportunity to save what we know is the greatest invention, freedom and liberty by God, given to, all people. And so just know that person that you're not reaching is an opportunity to make a difference, to change the direction that things are going right now. And let me tell you, I know you guys know this, if Trump loses this next election in 2020 and a Democrat takes office, we're done. I don't know how, because they will push all of this green energy stuff, I think, at a next level so that it can never be undone. So when it comes to the youth, I just feel this innate responsibility to share with them, as I did at this COP24 conference. My friend Alex Newman and I happened to walk up to two young men from Germany talking about, Egypt. One was from Egypt, the other was from Sweden, talking about how a German delegate did not believe in man-made global warming, who was at the conference, and they went to the United Nations Environment Program exhibit space to tattle on this German delegate, and we happened to walk up at that time, and so Alex and I were like, whoa, somebody is here who doesn't believe in man-made global warming, and they're like, I know, can you believe it? So that sparked a really fun conversation that we got on film, and as they were telling us about green energy, and we asked them about the United States, and the United States, they said, should be leading the way. Everyone says the United States should be leading the way in this green agenda. One of the guys was wearing glasses. And I said, okay, let me play devil's advocate here. You're wearing glasses. That is fossil fuel. And he was stumbled. He couldn't speak after that. He was like, yeah, well, and he changed the subject immediately. So I think, Dan, one of the keys that I've had, one of the successes I've had over the years is pointing out the hypocrisy. Your smartphone is both fossil fuel, carbon, and livestock byproducts. And those are the three things that the United Nations and these people want to get rid of. They want to control. They want to tax. But your smartphone is all those things. Your teeth are carbon. So as we start pointing out these things, and again, Mark Morano's book and Climate Hustle, another fabulous tool to debunk the things that are being spewed out there, and people are just believing because they're not doing their own research, which is why I go to these conferences. I have a dream to go check out the plastic ocean, because I keep hearing about the plastic ocean, and in California we had to get rid of our straws because of plastic ocean, this plastic ocean thing. I have a dream to go there so I could see firsthand for myself whether or not there is a problem. And I invite the people I have these conversations with, who I get in arguments with, to be firsthand information instead of spewing what Al Gore keeps telling them. And I think that's important.
I was going to say another thing, and I love the way Debbie went and talked to the person about the glasses, sunglasses, and smartphones, and things of that sort that are tangible and real. Most young people, and I wouldn't even just say this is limited to young people, they are not as into these issues as you may think. Hence, coming at them with a barrage of talking to them about the New World Order and talking to them about the Rockefellers or, some of the things that Al Gore's doing, they're not there. It's not a whole lot different reaching them than perhaps a missionary would, giving the gospel, going to natives. You talk about things they can understand, and if they show interest and want to read the back pages of a catechism or some deep theology, you can get into it with them, but start basic, start simple. And I think that when the realization comes and they find out that, hey, they really do want to take my car, that leads to more questions, and you can lead them down the path without hitting them with a lot that's a lot to take in sometimes when you know all this information. It can put people off. So I think try to keep it at where they're at, and also talk to things that mean something to the person you're talking to. It could be that they're concerned about power, but a lot of times I get when I'm starting to talk to them, why would they do this? Well, you tell them about the money and say, why would anybody do this? They get that. Most people understand that people might be doing something to make themselves rich because that's a reason that they may be motivated if they were to do something was to get more money. They may not be motivated by power and influence and communism and things like that. That's all kind of out there in the by and by. But start simple. Meet the person where they're at, talk about what's of interest to them, and make it relevant to their world, and I think you'll go a lot further.
Mm-hmm. I agree. And something that I'm 68 years old, so I'm moving into my final years, I guess. But the reality is, when you are that old, you can play the grandparent side of the coin, because we all know that kids don't like listening to their parents, but a lot of times they'll relate with their grandparents. And so, don't get into the preachy side of it, but talk about this stuff in ways that you can relate with the young people, and in a way that, they respect and they understand that you're there to help them.
Amen.
I was in a panel discussion. Actually, I went as press, and it was a press conference, and it was about education. This is at the COP24 Conference in Poland. Craig and I were just at, and it was a young person on the panel, and a bureaucrat, a teacher, and I think another bureaucrat. There were 4 people on this panel. And the conversation was education. It was Sweden, Denmark, and Germany who were represented in this discussion. And what they talked about is how they were going, and they already had 80 schools, and they were going to go across, they were going to use these 80 schools as a model for a green education across the world. And it would be, the model would be that there would be youth facilitators, young facilitators, because kids relate to kids, was the conversation. So how do we get more kids in this green movement? Kids relate to kids, and they came up with the idea of using kids to facilitate a UN-approved pre-recorded training on sustainable development. And the governments of those countries were already they weren't fully backing it as far as its policy, but they were supporting this kind of education. And so someone in one of the journalists asked the question, so is it going to be that where kids can engage with these training models? And the answer was no. In other words, they're going to be taught by, even though there's going to be a child or youth facilitating the video watching of this training, there would be no interaction on, so in other words, what they're being taught, they can't engage with, but they're being taught by a youth, so therefore it will resonate with them and they will believe what they're being told. And I thought this was like, are you kidding me? But, you know, kids do relate with kids mostly, and so, you know, we've got to pierce that bubble.
I will say that there is an authority that comes from grandpa and a teacher that gives it a little bit more gravitas oftentimes with them. Not that it isn't reinforced by their peers. I don't know if they're not making a mistake in that regard, but that wouldn't surprise me. One of the things that we have to be optimistic about to a degree is just as the government is ineffective at running the market economy and running businesses and actually really getting pretty much anything done, for the most part, these people are using a bureaucratic approach and a top-down approach, and it isn't always the most effective at reaching young people. Right now they have no competition, so it is effective. But I do believe for those pro-liberty, pro-freedom people, if we are a little bit more clever than they are, we can do a whole lot more with a lot less resources to counteract this.
Yes, Craig, and I have to say that when we look at what the left has done that's been effective, and you were talking about the rock conferences, rock concerts and things like that, that the left used. I remember all that because I grew up in that generation back in the 60s and early 70s when all that was going on. And we need to use the examples of the things that have worked well for the left and not be afraid to use the same kind of techniques, only do it in reverse. You know, Debbie, you mentioned Saul Alinsky, Rules for Radicals. I think the best thing in the world we need to do is all of us need to read that book and then use it in reverse.
Craig, did you want to comment on that?
Yes, I was going to say what we are doing with collegians is trying to use those techniques in reverse. I'll give you a couple tangibles. One of them is we had our own rock concert. We call it a pro-nuke concert because CPAC is in favor of nuclear technologies. In fact, while I was in Marseille, I even went to a nuclear fusion plant. We don't think this is something the government ought to run, but we think the technology is an effective one. And of course, it's attacked by the left going back to the 60s and 70s. And it would be one of the things you would think they'd be for in that it doesn't emit greenhouse gases, but the left is pretty much against anything that isn't wind and solar. Nevertheless, it was my opinion, given that I grew up a little bit later than that, but remember the no-nuke concerts, that why don't we try a pro-nuke one? And so a lot of people said, oh, you can't get rock bands to go out there and promote nuclear energy. This was back in probably 2012 at the University of Wisconsin, which is not exactly a bastion of conservatism. And so I said, well, let's give it a try. Well, most of these rock bands really don't care about the cause that they're going for. They just want a crowd so they can show off their music. And so we said, hey, at the University of Wisconsin, our CFAC local club is going to hold a pro-nuke concert. We're going to clean up the park, and would you come? And we had a bunch of bands show up and basically just play music, and then we'd interrupt the music for like 10 seconds. It was kind of modeled after what the left did. And we'd say, this concert's brought to you by nuclear power, and we mentioned a nuclear power plant not far away, handed out said, we have some handouts for you, and, this is a safe form of energy that's been powering Wisconsin for a number of years. Rock on. And everybody applauds, and then they go back to music. Simple enough, and absolutely no resistance to it from the crowd or from anybody else, except for a few leftists who had conniptions about it in the local Badger newspaper. But other than that, it was well attended, and people had a great time. So we do use that. We also do it with a lot of our stunts, where we will bring in people dressed as costumes, or we've held protests against some of the free speech issues on campus. We're not allowed to speak out if you're somebody to the right of center, and we've had big turnouts at those, and even changed the policy at the University of Alabama regarding free speech based on protests that we orchestrated on campus, and people had a great time talking about that. So, I totally agree with you that we can use these techniques. We have used them and are always looking for clever ways. And if you go to the cfaccampus.org website, you'll probably see a bunch of these types of things going on that we do employ that are throwbacks to perhaps our generation, Dan.
Well, and Craig, I'm kind of laughing while you're talking about some of these things because I know for a fact that young people, as long as you're selling it in the right way, they're listening. And boy, there's nothing in the world any easier to sell to a young person than the idea that they have a choice between freedom and slavery. And this ought to be a pretty simple sell. And that get it down, boil it down to the very basics, to the very simple things, and then present it as just a very simple statement. And 9 times out of 10, they'll agree with you.
I couldn't agree more.
And CFAC is always looking for where are we going next, whether it's a eco-related conference or a college that they could do one of these conferences with young people and have speakers who speak either on private property rights or energy or what have you. So if any listener out there has any ideas, you have a school a college in your area that you would love to see CFAC at, get in touch with Craig. This should be just like Camp Constitution, which is a family camp that I'm doing again this year. Lord Monckton will be there, Dr. Willie Soon, to talk about the solar impact on global warming. I'm going to talk about Agenda 21, sustainable development. This Camp Constitution is every year. It's a family Christian camp held by Hal Shurtleff. And we have fun. We are doing, it's a week-long camp, and it's on a lake in Massachusetts, and we do campfire at night and skits, and we raise the flag every morning. We pray at every meal, and we learn about the Bible, and we also learn about important issues. And the age range is like 2 years old. They have projects for young people, like really young toddlers, and drawing and stuff like making flags and stuff like that, all the way up to, us older folks. So, and other than CFAC and Camp Constitution, there is not a whole lot out there that we are doing to reach the youth and push back on what we're hearing every day, whether it's Fox News or CNN or MSNBC, about, a carbon tax and we're a democracy and all that other nonsense.
Well, and Debbie, I'm going to use this as a place to sell the fact that you're going to be speaking. You're going to be speaking at a Lincoln Reagan dinner in Dillon, Montana, at Western part of University of Montana Western Campus in Dillon on, I believe, the 19th of February.
Very excited. And speaking of universities and Montana, just go to your local college bookstore and check out the required reading. It is mostly stuff related to what Craig mentioned earlier, social justice or sustainable development. It is disgusting. So anyway, and that is just, an example, a sign you could see where things are being pushed. So, really important to reach universities like CFAC is doing. And yes, I can't wait to come to Montana again to share what I've been learning over the last several years about the direction that we are being pushed into right now without much pushback the other way.
So, Debbie, you'll be in Montana freezing. I will be even north of you in Alberta. I got a talk up in Calgary, and then I'm going 6 hours north of there to give a actually participate with the Cree Indians. They're putting me through some sort of ceremony where I sweat in a tent all night to talk, and then apparently I get the bona fides to be able to be somewhat of a Cree person to talk to them about the pipeline going through their territory. So I always say that never be afraid to meet people where they're at, and it's probably going to be a little bit peculiar seeing a white dude like me going in Indian ceremony, but in my opinion, this is the type of outreach we need to do, and meet people where they're at when we discuss our issues.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, the best way to make friends is to meet people and be friends, and the reality is most people want freedom. Most people want opportunity and choice, and all we need to do is we need to be there so that they understand we aren't their enemy, we're their friend. We're there to protect what they believe in, and they need to understand that. And I appreciate both of you folks. This has been a terrific program, and I have to tell you, I look forward to these every time. Craig, give our listeners a little bit of information again on CFACT and how they can get all the information that you have from your site.
Absolutely. CFACT is a nonprofit organization. We work on environmental and stewardship issues since 1985. We have a website where you can go and get everything from books to ordering our movie to just signing up for our free emails that keep people up to snuff on all the different things that are going on in this sustainable development, climate change, and other environmental issues. Our website is www.cfact.org, and CFACT is spelled C-F-A-C-T, cfact.org. So we encourage listeners to go to that website, sign up, and learn more.
Okay, well, great having both of you on the radio program. Debbie, as always, I look forward to the next time we get a chance to work together. And Craig, thank you for being here, and I hope our listeners connected a few dots today, and we look forward to having you on next week to connect a few more dots.